Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled with wealth and wondered why in the world others can get it, but no matter how hard you try to focus on it, it just doesn't come your way, then do we have the show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mitch Horowitz, editor of one of my new all-time favorite books by one of my all-time favorite authors. It's The Miracle Power of Your Mind, the Joseph Murphy Treasury, a compilation of 24 of my all-time favorites by Joseph Murphy, including The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, Believe in Yourself, Fear Not, and Riches Are Your Right. Today we'll talk about the power of your mind and your subconscious to create anything you desire. We'll look at how it works, how to use it, what you don't want to do with it, and even the best ways to pray. That plus we'll talk about surgery without anesthesia, the power of magnetized steel, and why in the world you want to daydream when in a sleepy state. So welcome to the show, Mitch. Are you ready to shine?
I am very glad to be here, Michael. Thank you.
Glad to have you here in a mighty woohoo!
All right.
So we were joking just a few minutes ago. This is probably the single biggest book I have ever.
It's a physical fitness experience in addition to a reading experience.
It's just shy of 1,000 pages.
That's correct, yeah. We had to adjust the trim size, actually, because it was getting difficult to bind it. But I wanted to create something that was really a near-complete record of Joseph Murphy's work. And I created it not only based on the conviction that people deserve to have a kind of one-stop experience for who Murphy is, but that for all its length, it's a very readable book. It's a wonderfully simple book, as simple as the man himself. And when we promise a lifetime of reading, you can see we're not kidding. But it's simple reading and beautiful reading.
No, it's interesting. I have just a couple books by my bed. I have Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and I have The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And I think for a while I may bump off Think and Grow Rich and keep this by my bed because it really is a lifetime of reading.
You know, it had dawned on me. I thought, gee, I should have a copy of the book ready to hold up, for your viewers. And then it dawned on me that the book was under my computer, serving to lift it up so that, to facilitate our conversation. But it's a very beautiful book, and I'm heartened by its success. I'm heartened by the success of some of the longer anthologies that we've been publishing in the area of positive mind metaphysics, because we live in an age where these kinds of books were no longer supposed to exist. We were told that MIT, the Media Lab at MIT, was processing an electronic book that they rather presumptuously called the last book. We were told that people were just going to be reading on their phones or on devices, but it's not the case. There are such large audiences for these books. People love the tactile experience of reading, and they want the completeness as well.
Well, I think Joseph Murphy would argue that there is an energy in the word, and then there is an energy in the physical book. And so being able to dog-ear it, mark it all up, and then to be able to just grab a book, something that you cannot do with quite the same energy behind it on a Kindle. Grab it and open it and find something beautiful on the page. It just doesn't feel the same on the Kindle.
It's really true. I use Kindle and other e-reading formats for convenience. Mm-hmm. And if we're on vacation and one of my kids forgets his book or what have you, I'm very glad it's there. But for the experience of really studying something and getting into the guts of it, there's no substitute for a book. Like you mentioned that your nightstand holds one of my favorite books, Think and Grow Rich. I've been through Think and Grow Rich so many times that I have literally had to tape up the binding of my favorite edition because it was falling apart. I wouldn't have it any other way. You personalize a book in ways that are not quite possible, regardless of all the fancy functions on an e-reader. It becomes part of you. Those are your notes and drawings in the margin. That's your packing tape on the spine that keeps it from falling apart. It's a very intimate thing.
It's funny because while I like to travel light, I want to take all my books with me. I want to take my library. There's an energy to it, and I want that with me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I always overpack books when I go on vacation, and I am a stringent, no-frills packer. But that stops when it comes to books. I always bring too many, which is just the way I want it.
Here's an egregious error to authors everywhere that I did many years ago, a huge faux pas, but I was doing a bike ride across the country, 5,000 miles, 40 days solo. and
Wow.
without any assistance. And so I brought a book with me, and not gonna be able to recall which book it was. The author was Dr. Wayne Dyer,
Uh-huh.
and he talks about how, and it was a big theme of mine. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And that was a big theme of his
Yeah.
book. So
Yeah.
it was perfect for the ride. But what I did is after I would read a section of the book, at the beginning, I would pull it out and mail it back to myself, which is a horrific thing to do with a
That's
book.
interesting.
But I wanted the book with me, and I was fatigued going over mountains with books.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that is terrific, actually. I encourage people to do whatever it takes to make this literature a part of their lives. If that means reading it on your phone, be my guest. But if that means tearing it up, mailing pieces to yourself, stowing pieces away along the biking trail, whatever it is you need to do it. It's very important to personalize these experiences, to make them right for you, because getting inside the guts of the work is what's going to bring change. So I applaud you doing that, and there'll be other copies of Wayne Dyer out there.
Absolutely. So going from there, I hope you forgive the term, but how did you become a Joseph Murphy geek or a nerd?
Yeah, oh, that's a beautiful term. I am a Murphy geek. I guess I came to love Murphy because I just found his work so radically challenging, but also so simple. People are always looking for ways to get inside positive mind metaphysics. And once they've gotten past the secret or the power of positive thinking, sometimes they feel that something else is out there. And as much as Murphy is probably a well-known name to many of your viewers, he's, in another sense, one of the most famous people that you've never heard of. There are lots of people I encounter who never know the name, although they've kind of heard of The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, his famous book from 1963. And the thing I love about Murphy, in a nutshell, is that he was a brilliant communicator, and he was unembarrassed about taking huge ideas to people in very bold and brave ways. You could test his ideas in your own life, you could prove them right, or you could say, gee, that's nonsense, and prove him wrong. It just occurs to me, I have this vintage pamphlet of Murphy's right here, How to Use the Power of Prayer.
Ooh.
And this was one of his earliest pamphlets from the 1940s, and he would always title his books in these very brave, bold, challenging ways. Your infinite power to be rich, how to attract money, riches are your right. And people could stick their nose up at it and say, well, gee, that seems to me a little classless, that seems to me a little bit like a carnival pitch. It wasn't a carnival pitch at all to him. He was deeply serious about it, but he also wanted to reach everyday people and speak to their most concrete needs.
What would you say, because you've clearly read a lot of his work, what would you say is one thing that you keep coming back to that you learned from him?
The thing I keep coming back to is that we do have this extraordinary mental activity that's always going on within us, and that's outpicturing in ways that are constantly surprising. And if we could try to get at the back of some of that energy, there really is, within the processes of our minds, an untapped dynamic. And this is true for all of us. Now, I have a metaphysical perspective on life. So in that sense, a person like Murphy is perfect for me. Murphy
What
believes,
do you mean by that?
I'll put it this way. I believe that there is a very fine line of separation between mental experience and spiritual experience. I believe in the concept of an oversoul, of an overmind, what the ancient Greeks called nous. I do believe that there are non-physical forms of communication, or what might be called ESP. I believe there is a creative, causative aspect to our thoughts. This is not something about which I have hardened opinions, but it's a conviction developed over many years, and I think it's something that we should all experiment with, go at our own pace, try. But even if one disagrees with me and says, well, look, I don't see life that way at all. I think life is gray matter. Okay, that's fine. But what I'm talking about still applies, because we're seeing things in the placebo response, in experiments around neuroplasticity, which involve changes in the gray matter of the brain based on one's thought patterns. So we can talk about this from a physical perspective. We can talk about it from a metaphysical perspective, but we can all agree that there are agencies in the mind that we just have the dimmest glimmer of understanding of, and you can use Joseph Murphy to experiment with that truth for yourself.
what I find fascinating about what you're saying is today it's starting to become mainstream. It's really cool. And our hope, one of our goals with the show is to really blow it out worldwide and make this as mainstream as we can, because what was, quote, woo-woo yesterday is now just beneath the surface. I say it's water boiling. It's coming up here. It's coming up there. People are talking about it. They're going to the yoga classes. They're doing their meditation. And so its time has come. But we're talking, Joseph Murphy, we're talking back like in the 30s.
For real, yes.
That he was learning this stuff. So what was his life trajectory, and how did he come to this almost in many ways a century ago?
That's right. His life is a perfect case in point of his philosophy, and it's worth learning something about. He grew up in the late 19th, early 20th century on the southern coast of Ireland. He was a kid growing up in a traditional Catholic family, a very large family, and he planned on studying for the priesthood. Now, he changed courses as he was a young man entering his 20s. He grew interested in some of the new metaphysical philosophies that were circulating in the West, New Thought, Christian Science, all these things that I grew up under the positive thinking movement. And he also studied to become a chemist or a druggist. He was trying to find a way to make a reasonable living. He was trying to find a career that could support him. Now, he came to New York City in the 1930s, at a time, the early 1930s, at a time when this country was going through the Great Depression. But it was nothing compared to what was happening in Ireland. Economic opportunity in Ireland, particularly Northern Ireland, was very, very limited at that time. So this kid packs it up, comes to New York City in the early 1930s, in the midst of the Great Depression, and he finds work as a pharmacist. He ran a drug counter at the Algonquin Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. That hotel, quite a famous place, is still there. And so Murphy bopped around for a while, working as a chemist and a druggist at different pharmacies. But he began to grow more and more interested in these metaphysical ideas, things like science of mind, which was the tradition that came from Ernest Holmes, aspects of Christian Science, the tradition that came from Mary Baker Eddy. And he discovered that he had a knack. He had a knack for communicating these ideas in a very simple way. He became ordained as a divine science minister. That's one of the ministries that was inspired by the work of Ernest Holmes and his contemporaries. And Murphy began to write books and pamphlets in the positive thinking tradition. And he had no real business apparatus at his back. He would just travel around the country speaking at metaphysical churches, auditoriums, different halls or social halls where he was invited to speak. He would live off of love offerings that were made by the congregants. He would sell his books and pamphlets, much like this one, at his talks, 50 cents a piece, 25 cents a piece. And eventually, he really began to develop a reputation. And this all started to explode for him in the early 1960s. He had been at it for some years at that point when he published The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. There was something about that book that caught fire. And I think it was because it combined his most radical metaphysical ideas. I mean, if Murphy were here, he would say, you live as you think. And he believed that in the absolute most literal sense. You live as you think. He was able to combine his metaphysical ideas with some of the things that had been bubbling up for some years coming out of psychology. The subconscious mind had by that point become a household term. A generation earlier, it was not widely heard. Now it was a household term. And there was something about a marriage of modern vernacular and metaphysical insight that made that book greatly successful. And his career exploded. So he was self-made.
And millions. He sold millions of copies.
He did. That book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, I would say, and I've worked in publishing for a long time, so I don't use these numbers in an overly casual way. I would say at this point, that book has probably sold 20 million copies around the world. It's quite remarkable.
So
yeah.
I want to talk about that book, but since you have another book in your hand right there, we might as well ask, and he starts off in The Power of Subconscious Mind talking about this, what is an effective prayer or a good way to pray?
Murphy felt that when you're praying, what you're really doing is you're igniting the energies of your own mind. For Murphy, and it's very important for people to understand this, the words mind and God were synonymous. he really believed that the creative power spoken of in Scripture and in various religious texts is the power of the individual's own imagination. That operative creative power exists within you, within me, within everyone. And that prayer to that power is really the ignition and the marriage of your deepest desires, your intellect, and your feelings. So he would encourage people to enter a very meditative state to reflect on what they really wanted from life, not just in some sing-song way, but really in a mature, uncompromising way. What do you really want? And to construct an affirmation or a visualization or a traditional prayer that united their desires, their intellect, their sense of ethics, and their feelings. The feeling state is very important. And that if you were in that exquisitely sensitive state, you could recite a prayer, recite an affirmation, or run a visualization in your mind. And he felt that if you hit that state, there was a guarantee of results. That to him was effective prayer.
And it's very powerful. In fact, there's a quote from Subconscious Mind: "A magnetized piece of steel will lift about 12 times its own weight. And if you demagnetize the same piece of steel, it will not even lift a feather."
Right, right. So it's the same substance, but it's an arrangement of the molecules that makes all the difference in what's going to happen. He would say that our mind may be the same substance, whether we're shuffling along, looking down at the sidewalk, not even sure of what we're doing, where we're going. But if you take that same mind and you focus it and you bring a kind of emotional conviction to it, again, this idea of marrying the intellect and the emotions was very important to Murphy. Then that mind becomes like your magnetized piece of steel.
So what then to Joseph is the power and the importance of faith? And what does faith mean to him?
Faith means confidence. In the same way that he saw mind as synonymous with God, he saw faith as synonymous with confidence. Now, if an individual doesn't have confidence, and that's a complaint that one hears from a lot of people, well, what can be done about that? You know, I would say if you don't feel confidence, that's a wonderful entry point to ask yourself, first of all, are my desires ethical? Is this something that's going to be for the good of all concerned? Murphy felt very strongly about that this is not just a go-it-alone world that we live in, but that there had to be a circuit of goodness. So if I decide I want to make automobile engines, is everybody that product touches being touched by a kind of goodness? Are the workers being properly compensated? Is the consumer getting what he or she is paying for? He believed that you can only profit ultimately as other people around you profit. So if a person has a crisis of faith or a crisis of confidence, because he saw that as synonymous, is your goal ethical? The other thing is, I think one has to ask, and I feel this is very important, we are not being invited into this way of thought to be unrealistic. Is my goal properly realistic to my training, my aptitude, my outlook? Now, I'm 50 years old. There may be some question as to whether I'm going to be the first man who goes to Mars. My application, to the space program might not get accepted, but there are other
for
things,
it.
right? Exactly. Although maybe one of your listeners can help, but one really does have to ask: is this aim that I'm seeking, that I'm after, does it unify things at which I'm either very, very good, or I can become good? If I need training, is the training available? Murphy also encouraged people to specialize. Whatever you want, whatever it is, be very, very focused on a specific exercise of that thing. Let's say you decide, well, I want to be a lawyer. Well, what kind of a lawyer? Do you want to be a defense attorney? Do you want to be a corporate lawyer? What do you want to do? Be very focused, and then try your very best to know more about your profession than anyone else. And all the more reason to be very, very specific about what you want, whether it's a profession or perhaps you're an artist and you have a certain dream of producing something. You have to be able to put in tens of thousands of hours in your life to making yourself as good at that as you can possibly be. So when people talk about a lack of faith or a lack of confidence, that's the road I would send them down. what is it that's getting in the way?
A few things to take there from there. The first is when we talk about confidence, he suggests I don't know if we'd use the term right way to pray, but a correct way, or things you don't want to do. For instance, you don't want to go to a store and look at something in the glass display and say, I can't afford it. That'd be a bad thing to do.
Right. He felt it was very important for people to cultivate a sense of success, even if that success may be at some point off in the future. He felt it was very, very important to cultivate a sense of success, and also, and I must emphasize this, I believe it's very important to consort with people and places that build your sense of success in a realistic way. If you're hanging around with people who think that your New Age interests are nonsense, or who think that you are off in fairy tale land, I would say you need to be with a new community. You need to be with a new group of people. And if that's not physically possible at a given time, well, vow that it will become possible.
Well,
it's also very important to put yourself in positions where you're strong.
If it's not physically possible, today, thank God we have the internet. And so you can get yourself at least involved electronically with a group that shares your interest, a Google group, a Google Hangouts group, or a Facebook group, so that you can start to resonate or get the peer pressure of that group.
That's right. It's vitally important. It's funny. When I was a little kid, I was watching the show Wonderama, to further date myself, and the singer Olivia Newton-John was on the show, and she was being asked by the host, a man named Bob McAllister, what advice she would have for young artists, young performers. And she said something that you could very easily just kind of roll your eyes at and say, gee, I've heard that 100 times. But sometimes you'll hear it in a new way, and it can become very valuable. She said, you really, as a young artist, have to be around people who believe in you. It's vitally, critically important that you surround yourself with people who believe in what you're doing. And I would say to all your listeners, try to hear those words in a fresh way and try to ask yourself, am I really doing that? Is that true of my home life? Is that true of my friends? Is that true of my work life? Because I think what she was hitting on, although it can sound like very ordinary advice, if you're willing to sit with it, it has a lot more depth than will first appear. And that's a statement that Murphy would have soundly agreed with.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think that is so important energetically. And it kind of leads to where I'm thinking of the group affecting you, but now I'm thinking of our subconscious mind affecting the mind. And
that's right.
And so what is the importance to him of the subconscious mind? Because if we're surrounding ourselves with all of these people who help bring us up, but we're shooting ourselves in the foot each step of the way.
Yeah. He felt that there was a conscious, objective mind that we walk around with all day, and we use it to find parking spaces and solve math problems and compile shopping lists, and that's all very true. But at the back of that, he felt there was a much deeper engine. You used the analogy of magnetism, and I think that's perfect. And that this deeper engine was not just going around devising shopping lists and looking for parking spaces, but rather was really directing the great currents and sea tides of our lives. And that if we could get in touch with that mind that we're not using all the time for work-a-day chores and such, that's where the power is. And that's what he was about.
So is there a difference, since you keep on alluding in subtle ways to the secret here, is there a difference between Joseph Murphy's view on the universe and what we got in that very popular culture movie?
There's not a difference. There's really not a difference. And it's interesting because I'm asked about The Secret constantly, and there's been this backlash in our culture against The Secret. Yeah. I've criticized The Secret myself. I have differences with Rhonda Byrne. In my book, One Simple Idea, which is a history and analysis of the positive thinking movement, I write about my differences with Rhonda. But I also applaud what she did because she got millions of people considering ways that they could use their minds differently. And that's an extraordinary thing. And thanks to Rhonda's efforts, you have people who had never heard of a Joseph Murphy or an Ernest Holmes or a Neville Goddard or a Florence Scovel Shinn who now know those people. And they will go off and they'll have their own experiences with those books. So I'm critical of Rhonda, but I applaud The Secret, and I'm not with this whole bandwagon mentality that we all have to dump on The Secret, and I find that everywhere. I write for a lot of mainstream places, and I find that they always expect me to dump on Rhonda Byrne or Oprah in some obligatory manner, and I don't feel that way at all. I think
Yeah.
they've done great things, and no, there's no difference between Joseph Murphy and The Secret. Read them both. Make your own judgment.
So I want to dive back into Joseph Murphy, but I've got to
Yeah,
open the can of words just a little bit, not as a criticism,
lay it
but
on me.
what is your strongest area of we'll call it positive disagreement, because we're all on the same train, or all wanting to head in the same
Yeah.
direction and help others to get there.
Uh, is that to say my area of disagreement with Joseph Murphy or with Rhonda Byrne?
With Rhonda, well, if we have both, we'll go both, but we'll go Rhonda first.
Okay, let's go Rhonda first. This is where I disagree with Rhonda. Um, Rhonda believes that we all live under one mental super law, and that determines everything that happens to you. So whatever happens to you, whether it's joyous or catastrophic, emanates from your thoughts. I don't agree with Rhonda on that for the following reason. I think that while it may very well be true that we do live under a kind of mental super law, we also live under many, many, many laws and forces. You could say, for example, that we all live under the law of gravity. Well, that's true, but you're going to experience gravity very differently on Earth than on the moon or in outer space or on the planet Jupiter, and so on and so forth. It's still a law, it's still constantly operative, but the physical circumstances that you find that in are going to make a great deal of difference in how that universal law affects you. So if people in Haiti, for example, are stricken by a terrible earthquake, that's because they live on an earthquake fault, I believe. And, if an astronaut on the moon can jump 5 feet in the air and I can only jump 2 feet, that's because he is in a different situation of physical mass on the moon, and the laws of gravitation are different. I feel it's very important that we not look at other people's suffering, whatever it may be, and explain it away by saying, well, somehow it dates back to this law in their mind. The only empiricism that we have on the spiritual path is our own self-experience. And Rhonda has on occasion commented on things that have happened to people in situations like a 9/11 or the Holocaust. And my feeling is, look, she has never experienced those things. I have never experienced those things. I don't feel that analyzing my neighbor's suffering or analyzing the suffering of someone I never knew is a form of self-inquiry. I have a difference there. That's my difference with Rhonda. And to some extent, that the same carries over to Joseph Murphy. I love this man, and I am very dedicated to this man. But sometimes Murphy would enter that same kind of thought process. And when he would want to explain a catastrophe, for example, that happened to a child, let's say a child is born with a terrible disability, he wrote in the 1970s, well, you have to think of human thought as this vast, limitless ocean. And it may be that something that somebody thought eons ago affected that individual in the present. And I say to myself, well, okay, I'm with you, but if something that an individual thought eons ago could cause great harm to somebody last Thursday, that starts to sound a lot like randomness. That starts to sound like a way of explaining away randomness. I don't quite view things that way. I think we live under many laws and forces, of which the mind is one and is very precious and powerful. And it may be ultimate, but we're not always in circumstances and situations where we can experience that ultimate sway of the mind. So those are areas where I differ with Murphy and with Rhonda Byrne.
Makes sense, and it's interesting because the next thing that I was going to bring up is a quote that's more of empowerment of Joseph Murphy, which kind of goes in the opposite direction of what you just mentioned. It's that you have the power to choose health and happiness. You can choose to be friendly, choose to be unfriendly, choose to be cooperative, joyous, friendly, lovable, and the whole world will respond. This is the best way to develop a wonderful personality.
Yes, I agree with that. I completely agree with that. I also know that in so choosing, I'm going to fail. I make efforts, my efforts fail, I get back up on the horse. But making that choice, what an extraordinary, powerful choice to make. You're doing everything you can with the agency you've been given. And I think that's a blessed thing.
So how do we start to turn things over to the subconscious? We made the choice consciously. We say, I want to be abundant, or I want this great job, or whatever it is, just want to be happier. How do we then tell our subconscious, and what does that look like to get busy on it?
That's what a wonderful question. And the answer to wonderful questions is always something simple.
Yep.
And I believe very deeply in simple methods and techniques. First of all, this is something Joseph Murphy believed, and this was affirmed decades later by scientists who studied sleep and the human psyche. There's a state that we find ourselves in just before we drift off to sleep at night, or just, thank you, it's happened before, or just when we're coming to in the morning, and it's sometimes called the hypnagogic state. Mm-hmm. It's a state of an exquisite mental sensitivity when all of our mental faculties are working. We know what's going on around us. We have sensory experience, but we're greatly, greatly relaxed. We're very physically relaxed. It's usually accompanied by a great deal of quietness. Mm-hmm. That can be a time of exquisite creativity and exquisite receptivity. I would say to people, start with, tonight, when you're going to bed, just as you're in that hypnagogic state where you're drifting off and you're in a state of exquisite relaxation. It's not something you have to force. It's something that happens every single night. Visualize something that you would like, or visualize a situation that you would like to find a solution to, an answer, a form of help. That is one way to commence the energies of the subconscious mind. Ideas may come to you. Relationships may come to you. People may enter your life that are prepared to lend you a hand or meet you halfway in a very unexpected fashion. Just try it. That's one way that you can begin, I think, to experiment with these energies.
So using the power of imagination, using it right before your sleep in that of twilight state. Why is it so important that we don't say, for instance, try using affirmations that time like, I hope so, or I wish I might be healed? Right.
It's very interesting. Ever since the dawn of this positive mind metaphysics in the modern West, people have considered and reconsidered the question of what makes an effective affirmation. Mm-hmm. There are some people who would say an affirmation should never push your success or your happiness off to the future, because then you're cementing yourself into a state of constantly hoping for something that's not here. Mm-hmm. It should recognize that it's here. Now, what's that?
A lack of consciousness at that point.
I would bring a little leavening to that.
Yay.
I do think that what's really necessary in an affirmation is not so much present tense, future tense, I hope, I wish. What's necessary is a feeling of faith and relaxation and a uniting of thought and emotions, trying to capture that state of relief that you would feel if you got that very letter or email that you were waiting for. Just try to enact a drama or a scene within your mind that would give you that sense of relief. You're kind of being an actor almost. You're being a method actor. Let yourself do that. Try that. Don't get hung up on whether the information is past, present, future. Just try to unite emotion with it. That's the sweet spot. That's the key thing, I believe.
That makes perfect sense. Jessica, my wife, also the producer of the show, she banged her shin earlier today in the gym. It's all bloody. It'll be okay.
Yeah, in there.
But she went to take a nap, and I said, you should program your subconscious for perfect health when you go to sleep now to take a nap. What should she do? What would be a should? I don't even like that word. But what's a great way to practice this?
I think, first of all, and my apologies to her, I broke my toe recently. I'm always doing things like that. I just stopped practicing yoga for about 6 weeks. I think that when you have a physical accident or an illness or anything that requires recovery, my counsel is to kind of go at it with everything available to you, which can mean medicine, prayer, affirmation, nutrition, keeping yourself in good spirits. All of these things become the road to your recovery. So I think telling her to visualize, affirm, that's wonderful. That's wonderful because we are learning things right here now in placebo response studies that are just blowing the minds of researchers. And the only people who don't have a deep sense of mystery around it are the people who generally don't know what they're talking about. The researchers themselves, and I've spoken to some of them, people at Harvard Medical School, people who are affiliated with peer-reviewed journals and articles, they have a very appropriate and respectful sense of mystery about what's going on. There's no quick, easy, automatic answers as to what the placebo response is, and that's good. Because as soon as we get to that place, we stop experimenting.
And for people listening, what we're talking about is giving you the sugar pill, and suddenly you're as healthy as the person who got the drug, or in some cases, you're healthier.
And even deepening that, there was a study in late 2010 at Harvard Medical School where researchers found that people suffering from irritable bowel syndrome experienced significant relief even when told that they were being given a sugar pill, so to speak. And to the great credit of those researchers, they chose not to judge their data. They reported their data and said, we don't know what happened here. Now, everybody has their own pet theories about what happened. I have mine. But we don't know. So encouraging somebody to try to use the energies of the mind is a wonderful thing to do. It also might be necessary to tape up a broken toe, or if it's something more serious, you want the best in alternative or mainstream medical care, whatever your choice is, in a responsible way. But I would use everything. Stop at nothing. We've been given these things. Use them.
Amen. Let's switch gears from there, and we're just gonna change one letter here, and let's go from health to wealth.
Yeah.
And what would Joseph Murphy? He's written multiple books. That's an understatement.
Oh yes. For real. Right. That's putting it modestly. Yeah.
So where do we even start on that one? How do we start to get a let's say? Well, he talks about wealth is a state of mind.
Yes. Yes. Murphy believed very strongly that everything that happens to us, whether relationships, circumstances, physical issues, financial issues, starts in the mind. And part of his popularity was due to the fact that he understood very early on that Americans were interested, were hungry for, were needful of resources and success, and they were willing to look everywhere for these things in their homes and in their churches, in their businesses, and in their most deeply felt religious convictions. And he felt that it was possible and admirable to pray for money, to use the resources of your mind, your sense of faith, confidence, he equated mind with God, to bring about abundance in your life. And he recommended using the same things that you and I have just been discussing, an emotionally felt prayer, affirmation, or visualization, and trying throughout the course of the day to maintain a sense of confidence, which might involve all those things I just mentioned, but also being in the company of people and possessing a feeling of oneself of comfort, agency, being at home with oneself. So, for example, a previous generation told us, don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want. Well, that might have made sense for a previous generation, but for our generation, I would say dressing to feel a sense of comfort, self-expression, honesty, being who you really are, that is also an important component.
Well, that raises your frequency.
Yes, and it sets in motion, I think, some of these positive forces that we're talking about. You know, it's funny, when I was a kid and I had my first job, I would wear a tie almost every day. It was required. That was the workplace. It wasn't something I really wanted to do. Now at the age of 50, you know, I can fortunately dress however the hell I want. And that's been a blessing. That's been a blessing. Those little things can raise your sense of mental aptitude, can summon up these energies. Never neglect little things. Embrace them. Don't force yourself to try to carry around Monopoly money and feel rich.
Well, this is self-love. What you're talking about now is taking the best care of yourself you can to raise your frequency.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, some of the older generation of New Thought folk, they literally would prescribe things like carrying around funny money or Monopoly money, you know. And if that works for you, be my guest. But to our generation, that would probably feel pretty silly. But what our generation can do is, you know, wear the kinds of glasses you want, wear the kinds of sneakers you want. Obviously, you have to be appropriate. Don't wear flip-flops to a funeral. But within the bounds of being respectful of other people, again, forming that circuit, it's very important that you express yourself as you wish to be. That will help bring you wealth, because that will make you more comfortable. That will make you more of a kind of open circuit, and that's very important.
Woohoo!
Right. So everybody wear T-shirts every day.
I love it. So going from there, I can't resist. When I had to wear a tie for many years myself, I did it outside of the mainstream way. They called me the tie guy because I'd have all the Looney Tunes, Mickey Mouse, you name the ties. So because if I'm gonna be wearing this, I just wanted to have fun with it and bring whatever energy I could to the game.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I write a column for Science of Mind magazine, the Positive Thinking magazine, and I have a column that'll be coming up in a future issue on the psychology of clothing, and I'm going to talk more about this. There is something about, we're always told change comes from within, and that's certainly true, but change can come from everywhere. It can come from without, it can come from within. Engendering the feelings within that produce positive change sometimes does involve an outer change. So if that means your clothing or your haircut or what have you, go to it. You know, I'm all for it.
So going from there was something you mentioned a few minutes ago that I think it's important to double back on. It was kind of a feeling, a sensation that I can sense some people listening to this would have when you said he felt it was a positive thing. He felt it was appropriate to pray for money. Yes. And I can hear some people's necks snapping back, going, "Whoa, pray for money! Isn't that?" Well, money is the root of all evil. Money is bad. You only get rich by blah, 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 blah. What would Joseph Murphy say about this? Because we're a very conflicted world or society when it comes to money.
That's for real. That's for real. Murphy addressed this very head on, and he said, look, you don't want to make a god of money. You don't want your life to revolve around money. Money is just a means of exchange. Don't worship money. But it's also, at the same time, a very natural part of life, a very necessary part of life. We don't live in a bartering society anymore. We live in a society where currency is the form of exchange. And the ability to have that human exchange with other people for things that you want or need and that they want or need is very natural. So approach it naturally. And he felt that if money is something that a person feels they need in greater supply in their life, why wouldn't you turn to God for that? And I've asked a lot of people about this. I have spoken to people who are Orthodox Jews, for example. I've spoken to people who are evangelical Christians. I've spoken to people who have a deeply serious attachment to traditional religion. And I've said, do you think it is appropriate for an individual to ask God, or whatever terms you want to use, for material success? And they've all said yes. They've said you really can't and shouldn't try to put limits on your sense of a relationship with the divine. It is appropriate. The inappropriateness is when one comes to erect it as this all-important thing in life above everything else, or when it becomes a kind of addiction. And we know when we're caught in an addiction because it's a joyless experience. It's not just drinking socially or having sexual encounters socially and in an atmosphere of mutual consent, but it becomes a kind of joyless, almost obsessive redundancy. Mm-hmm. So if money is that for me or for my neighbor, that's a problem. But you know when you're in that state, simply for the betterment of your circumstances and for others, I think there's no holds barred.
Well, that's exactly where I was going, which is you mentioned earlier the 3 steps of success. And one of those pieces, number 3, would be to help others. So if you're seeking as much money, a mountain of money, and you're using it to help others, then Joseph Murphy would say, you go, boy.
He really would. And he spoke of life as being a kind of circuit, and that you had to make sure the circuit was complete, that there was no real wealth or happiness in producing an inferior product or exploiting another person in the workplace. If everyone was profiting, he felt that that was ethically closing the circuit and would in turn bring you more good things.
Amen. And you go boys and you go girls as well. With
Yeah.
that said, what does he mean by it's your right to be rich?
That is such a wonderful question because he did use that in a book titled, Your Right to Be Rich. He felt that we live in a world ultimately of abundance, and that the ultimate truth of life is goodness and ecstasy, a point of view, frankly, that you can find in the Vedic tradition as well. But Murphy was a 20th century modern guy who was also dealing with people who lived, as we all do, in circumstances of material exchange and reality. And he felt that that didn't mean that we had to get completely lost in the material, nor did it mean that we had to forget this idea that life is ultimately goodness and ecstasy, and that you could unite those two in a materialistic 20th century society by seeking justly earned and generative resources, money. And he felt it was your right, it is your right, as an individual, as a creation of the divine, to participate in all the good things of the divine. You're entitled to a cup that is full. You're entitled to fields that are fertile. You're entitled to a paycheck that is just and fair and good and comfortable. He felt money is your right.
Beautiful. From there, what would you say he would say is because he talks about some things that are not the right way to affirm money. What would be one simple way that he would say to affirm money?
Cultivate a feeling of abundance and generosity. See yourself receiving and spending money in ways that benefits other people, whether in your mind that's a family vacation or that's educating a kid, or to be quite frank, and I have to, give a positive shout out to Rhonda Byrne here, because everybody dumps on Rhonda for telling people to manifest Mercedes Benzes. She doesn't really do that, but the popular mind has determined that she does. So let's look at that. Is there something wrong with trying to manifest a Mercedes Benz? Of course not. Of course not. Who am I to judge that? It's a perfectly well-made car. You need a way to get around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's up to the individual where his or her energies are going to go. But I think that as long as you're being generative and helpful to another, you're completing that circuit. But if you're taking advantage of other people, being exploitative or cruel to other people, paying a worker as little as you can get away with, well, apologies to Milton Friedman, but I don't think that's right. And I don't think that Joseph Murphy would believe that that's right. That's not creating the full circuit that he believed in.
Well, thank you for sharing that. From there, just a few more things, then we'll jump into a couple wrap-up questions.
Yeah.
He says, mental coercion or too much effort shows anxiety and fear which block your answer. Easy does it. What does he mean by that?
Isn't that beautiful? Now, easy does it. That's one of these expressions we take for granted, but it has very beautiful roots. It came out of the 12-step movement. It was an expression that may have been coined by Alcoholics Anonymous founder Bill Wilson or one of his collaborators. Murphy believed that one of the primary causes of failure was simply trying too hard, was straining the mind, your mental faculties. Mm-hmm. He believed that direction of effort in a way that felt unnatural, heavy, emotionally draining would produce failure.
And that would kind of lock down, because he talks about when the mind is relaxed, you can accept an idea, your conscious goes to work.
That's right.
So if your mind is tight, it can't accept anything, and you've gone the reverse.
That's right. That's right. You go into reverse, you become very closed down, you don't grow. It's not a generative state. He believed that you needed to just cultivate a state of very gentle relaxation. Sometimes Murphy would talk about meditation, and some people still have trouble figuring out what kind of meditation, how do I meditate? Mm-hmm. Personally, I practice transcendental meditation, and that's been a very good experience for me. People can do whatever they want to do, but they might not want to meditate at all in strict terms. You can nap. Napping is a form of meditation. If you were to nap every day at 3 p.m., accomplishes much the same thing.
I have a term that Jessica and I use called napitation.
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's wonderful. One of my great heroes in the positive thinking tradition, Neville Goddard, spoke of how he would each day after lunch, circumstances permitting, at about 3 p.m., go into a little nap, and he would use that nap state to visualize. That's a perfect means of meditation. So use that. Just don't strain. And also, if you're in a state of emotional duress, people ask me all the time, how can I feel positive if something terrible has happened to me? And I say, right on, right on. Don't deny that. There are going to be times of sorrow. There are going to be times of anxiety, of sadness. Just let it be. Don't try to force yourself at every moment to be Mr. Happy Thoughts. That's not the right way to go about it. If you're in a state of sorrow or sadness, maybe you need to go hit a baseball around. Maybe you need to go to the movies. Maybe you need to go have a drink with a friend. Just hang out. Enjoy yourself. Come back to these exercises when you're in a more relaxed and accessible state.
Again, self-love, taking care of
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
The last thing I have before a few wrap-up questions is, what would you say Joseph would say about the power of imagination?
Well, the power of imagination. Imagination is a term that was used by one of Murphy's contemporaries and a friend of his, Neville Goddard, who was a great hero to me. He's probably the positive mind thinker who I most deeply love, if I had to select one. But Murphy would have agreed with Neville's thesis that imagination is the engine of creation, and that if you use your imagination, not in a scattershot way, where you don't just kind of spill it away on random daydreams where you jump from one thought to the next, or rerun arguments in your head, which is a really bad use of the imagination. If you use it in a creative way, it will absolutely produce results. He would probably say visualization and imagination are the same concept.
Beautiful. So a personal question we like to ask all our guests toward the end, which is, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Oh, boy. I guess at this point in my life, I would say I derive my greatest happiness from the expression of myself as a writer and as a speaker. I write very widely on these topics. Talking to you about these topics has been a great joy. For me personally, the time just flew by. I hope your viewers will feel the same. But having the opportunity to explore these things, it brings me, outside of spending time with my kids, some of the greatest joy in my existence.
Oh, I'm so happy that you mentioned kids. What would you recommend we teach kids today? Where do we start with them?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I think it's never too early to start raising kids on sacred literature. I have 2 young boys. There was a period of time where before going to bed each night, I would read them passages from the Jefferson Bible, which was Thomas Jefferson's abridgment of Scripture. I do think, and I would put this challenge out to some of your viewers, we do need more New Thought literature for children. There have been precious few New Thought books written for kids, and I think we need more. I think they need to be very simple, very practical, very realistic for contemporary moms and dads or guardians. But I would put the challenge out to your listeners that we need more New Thought books for kids, and they have to be good books.
Beautiful. I love it. So where can people go to find out more and to find this book and other great books?
Yeah. Well, as far as finding me, I'm super easy. Just throw the name Mitch Horowitz into Google, and you'll never get rid of me. Or you can just go directly to my website, mitchhorowitz.com. Anybody who emails me, I'll send them some goodies. This book can be found on Amazon, or if you want to read it electronically, go to iTunes, go to Kindle, go to your local bookstore, go to Barnes & Noble. Anywhere books are sold, you can buy this book.
Fantastic. And do you have time for a short meditation? Do you want to try that at the end?
I'd be very happy to. Thank you.
So let's do that. Before I do that, any last words of wisdom you want to share?
I just want to thank you and your listeners for letting me hang out with you for this hour and discuss these topics. I hope it's been fruitful.
It's been fruitful and a lot of fun. I'd certainly put out there a mighty woohoo!
All right. Thank you. I'll take it.
All right. So whenever you're ready, go for it.
All right. I'd like you to sit back wherever you are. If you are in a workplace and you have some privacy, if you're wearing headphones, if you're at home, feel free to lie down, feel free to recline. Put yourself in any position where you feel at ease, comfortable. Breathe deeply. And from this state of physical comfort and relaxation, make a vow to yourself that for the next 24 hours, you're going to set your mind onto a particular topic, and you're going to approach this topic with great calmness and maturity. And this topic is what do I really want? What do I really want? And I'd ask you over these next 24 hours to hold that topic. Hold it like you might hold a flower or something that you're able to carry around with you from every situation, whether you're driving, whether you're in your office, whether you're having a meal with your family. You don't have to tell anybody about it. It's just yours. Just hold that flower and return, again, calmly and maturely to that thought. What do I really want in life? And as you ask yourself that question, I want you to be very brave. You don't have to fall back on anything that you've said in the past. You don't have to be concerned that you contradict what you said last year, last week, or in the last 5 minutes. It's your question. It's yours. You don't have to recite anything to yourself that you think you should say. No one else is listening. And you don't have to repeat anything to yourself that you've enunciated in the past. Approach this question as if you're asking it for the very, very first time in your life, and hold it for 24 hours. What do I really want? What do I really want? It may be something very surprising. Keep a pencil and paper or some kind of writing device nearby so that if you wish, you can take down notes over the course of these 24 hours. You might wake up in the middle of the night and want to take down a note. You might have a dream, and you may want to jot down a few lines about the dream. Let yourself do that. If you're in a car and you want to remember something, you just hold the thought that I'm going to remember this and I'm going to write it down as soon as I've reached my destination and I'm able to. This is your exquisite gift to yourself for the next 24 hours. You don't have to tell anyone you're doing it. You don't have to advertise it to anybody. You don't have to get anybody else's feedback. Just be completely relaxed. This is you, within the private confines of your own existence, asking yourself this question. And I wish you every good thing and wonderful discoveries as you hold this question for the next 24 hours. So let's share this intention together that we, each of us, will hold this wonderful, exquisite question in a relaxed, mature way for 24 hours. And thank you.
Thank you. That's powerful. That's going to do a lot of good. I
So,
can't thank you enough for doing that.
thank you, Michael.
And I want to thank you so much for being on the show. For everyone out there, I got to crank it back up.
Yeah, right on, right.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, check out the miracle power of your mind, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you, Mitch. This has been a lot of fun.
For me too.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!